English translation, 855th Contact Saturday, the 15th of July 2023, 10:43 HRS.
Hello, greetings, my friend. Here I am again.
Yes, greetings, Quetzal, dear friend. I have something for you to look at in a moment, because a certain Joseph writes that the whole thing is a contradiction because I said that Hitler and Eva Braun committed suicide. Obviously, people do not think enough themselves and therefore do not understand correctly, precisely because they lack their own power of thought. Therefore, they do not think enough and correctly themselves, and therefore do not understand that certain statements have several meanings, and must also be understood in a broader sense. Billy's note. It was obviously also explained to Bernadette in this manner in an email, as she later told me in the kitchen. Thus, when the suicide of Hitler and Eva Braun was first discussed, it was only said that they had liquidated themselves, although it was not said how this suicide took place. At that time and for the following decades, much was only assumed and therefore not clear, which meant that on the one hand, various versions were mentioned, but what really happened only emerged later or was corrected. This is precisely how it came about, what constantly happens on Earth, that different versions emerged until finally everything became clear, and that only through a return journey. So the following was said in the beginning note. Billy, question to Christian, who says that Joseph is a man who translates contact reports. As Svath once explained to me, Adolf Hitler was a syphilitic and already incurably ill in the third stage, which meant that his consciousness was already no longer completely clear in his head. His consciousness was already partially impaired, which meant that he was no longer able to think and act clearly, and also became megalomaniac and unpredictable. He would have died sooner or later from this disease, syphilis, if he hadn't shot himself, which he actually did, didn't he? At any rate, that is what Svath said.
Then there was further talk.
Because of Adolf Hitler, who instigated the Second World War. To this day, it is not clear how this mass murderer killed himself. Do you know anything about that? It is always claimed that he poisoned himself, while others claim that he fled to Spain or South America.
Then once Urlana brought a version of an earthly rumor.
These concerns belong to my knowledge. Adolf Hitler, fearing that his suicide might fail, deprived himself of his life in two processes. For first, he ingested a cyanide capsule, which he bit and swallowed, and then immediately put a handgun in his mouth and shot himself in the brain with it, the bullet then exiting from the side of the back of his head. His remains were secretly buried by the Russians in East Germany, where, however, they were dug up again in 1975 and thrown away so that no neo-Nazi cult site could be created. Parts of the skull and dentition were brought to Russia, where they are still kept today. With this, I have said the most important things in a short process.
This knowledge of Urlana was then investigated, and it was explored that she had taken this knowledge from a religious writing of a sectarian, which was written by a eugenicist named Schlaphoff as a template. Then finally the following was explained by me, which was based on a review arranged by Svath before he left Earth forever.
It's all right. I don't want to talk about that either. I just want to say that the idiotic conspiracy theories are absolute nonsense, that Hitler and his Eva fled to Argentina. There must have been a Hitler look-alike and an Eva look-alike who were built up as Hitler and Eva Braun during years of hard training in the 1930s, and consequently both became so perfect in their roles that the uninitiated could not tell the difference between them and the real thing. Only the two closest confidants around Hitler knew the truth, for all those involved in building up and training the two doubles were liquidated. These doubles were also provided with false papers in the names of Hitler and his Eva Braun, just as they were given false papers and fled to Argentina when the Soviets attacked, while Hitler himself and his wife Eva holed up in the Führer bunker in Berlin and really blessed their time. The lie, however, is that the criminal killed himself and his wife because he was too cowardly to do so. So he and Eva Braun were shot by two fanatics who listened to him, which was then presented as suicide and also recorded as such. Hitler himself was really too cowardly to shoot his Eva and commit suicide, after which the two executioners, loyal and completely obedient to Hitler until death, killed him and Eva Braun on the 30th of April 1945 at 1533 HRS with 2 shots to the head. The 2 Hitler fanatics swore to each other that they would draw up false, lying protocols, just as the 2 Hitler fanatics also swore to each other that they would maintain silence about everything until their deaths, and that Hitler would continue to exist as a supposedly courageous suicide hero even after his death. This explains from the point of view of reality how it actually happened and what was actually the case, completely different from what the 2 murderers lied about in the false and falsified protocols and later statements. That was what happened with regard to the suicide of Adolf Hitler and Eva Braun. Hitler was a coward and something different from what is generally still claimed today by right-wing extremists and other Hitler fanatics, that is to say Nazis or neo-Nazis, who glorify him as a great man. He was in fact only a coward, and in such a way that he was in fact only a pitiful figure incapable of life. Consequently, he could only appear great and strong to the outside world because his fellow men blindly and thoughtlessly believed his fanatical speeches and consequently paid him stupid homage. It is also to be said that in addition to the couple who doubled Adolf Hitler and Eva Braun, there was a second doubled couple. But they were murdered by those who also shot Hitler and Eva Braun, shortly after they were both dead.
That was indeed the case, as I gathered from Svatha's notes at the time. But what I want to say about what this Joseph obviously does not consider and does not understand is that Earth humans often think superficially and create imaginary events and memories that have nothing to do with reality, as Ptah and I together could read out from Svatha's records. However, when something other than reality and truth is said and assumed because a thing is not thoroughly considered, then
the human being is probably not a lamp of real and true self-thinking and logic. That is unfortunate.
I didn't mean to say it in that process, but it is exactly what I wanted to express in slightly different words. Suicide, that is to say, suicide is also to be described as such if someone else is commissioned to carry out the killing, that is to say, to carry it out, if the human being in question cannot or does not want to do it himself or herself for some personal reason. Also in this process, it remains a suicide, that is to say, a personal suicide, which happens more often and is mistakenly considered as pure murder, which it also is in principle, but also suicide for the person who has commissioned someone to do it.
For some Earthlings with a short way of thinking, this is probably too high and therefore not comprehensible and therefore incomprehensible. This is also a fact that often leads to the fact that unconsciously or consciously lies are invented and spread as well as frauds are committed. That this happens is very often because the Earthling does not think deeply about everything that really needs thinking about, such as the matter raised by Jose. This has obviously been misunderstood by those who are not logical thinkers, but only illusory thinkers, and as a result, false judgments and also new lies and assertions are being made in good faith. In my opinion, this will also certainly be the case with what you said and what Jose emailed, which is published on the internet and proves that the alleged first moon landing never took place as claimed and lied about. This, as well as what you explained yesterday, namely regarding falsification of the facts in the pictures, which in the end in their original making lead back to the USA government and USA shadow government, as well as NASA, in order to create false evidence with it. This will certainly also be misinterpreted again by bogus thinkers, because everything is misunderstood and falsely exploited. Consequently, the whole thing is a new proof of the falseness of the alleged first moon landing.
This will probably be so, and therefore you should banish this subject from the repertoire of your explanations, and not engage in it anymore, nor ever speak about it, because it only creates more confusion and leads on endlessly.
Exactly. And the joke, as Michael Fee told me by telephone from America, will certainly be misinterpreted and misjudged as an effective joke. Unfortunately, it happens very often that what is said is misunderstood by the Earthlings and is spoken and evaluated incomprehensibly, because the actual meaning is not recognized and also not understood. When the two of us talk to each other, for example, we use a different language of meaning than is usual for human beings here on Earth, so that this and that is then misunderstood and correspondingly misinterpreted. For this, I can imagine, or probably even calculate for sure, that what you explicitly explained yesterday is also misunderstood.
What I said yesterday was clear and explicit and not misunderstood. Consequently, I am not aware that anything was said that was not correct.
You say that according to your correct understanding, and your words were indeed also reproduced exactly and thus precisely in the contact report, to which, however, I think that human beings simply inhale everything, without really thinking much about what was actually said. As a rule, only an illusory thinking takes place, and with it also a state of not knowing what reality is. And so in this case, what is really all fabricated and a joke, but nevertheless not a joke. This is obviously Romish talk for you, but I think that what was said and called falsification from the falsification machinations of NASA, the U.S. government as well as the U.S. shadow government, is just not a joke, as Michael V. called it in Wrong Understanding, but is otherwise in reality based on truth, as well as further, which however does not go correctly through the brain windings of the Earthlings, as I have already received various reactions from all over the world within a few hours since the publication of Jose's report excerpt. Logic is not exactly the strength of the majority of Earthlings, so their illusory thinking only leads to inferior and twisted interpretations of their own, which are far removed from what is fundamentally the point of the whole thing. This gives rise not only to misunderstandings, but also to quite solid lies and ultimately even to fraud. That unfortunately the majority of Earth humans think in an illogical way is already evident from what has already been said about Hitler and not taken into consideration, that various statements were based on different sources and were only finally corrected by the facts.
I don't understand that, because clear, logical, and thus rational, as well as reasonable thinking, is surely always the prerequisite for creating clarity before misunderstandings arise. Therefore, it is necessary in every case that in one's own interest, something heard or otherwise experienced is thoroughly thought through, so that the true or false state of the matter can be fathomed. If this is not done through real self-thinking, but only through illusory thinking, which also corresponds to faith thinking, then the effective truth cannot be found.
That is probably correct, but not for the majority of Earthlings. Consequently, what you said yesterday is also definitely not understood. That everything as I am saying it now is not a joke, and yet a joke. However, I doubt whether what is being said is understood, because the reactions to the publication of Jose's internet excerpt prove the opposite to me. Real thinking or only illusory thoughts or illusory thinking are two different things. And the fact that St. K was murdered more than 20 years ago, which was explained as heart failure or something like that, had its reasons for certain people, so the whole thing can only be understood when everything in this regard has been established.
That will be done by us, after which I can explain everything to you.
Which doesn't interest me, because enough has already happened with it that a theater has already arisen through Jose's email and its publication. Because instead of correct thinking, only illusory thinking is being done, and thus misunderstandings are being put into the world that could have been avoided through clear thinking. That the faked film sequences are not a fake, that is to say not a joke, but correctly a fake, that is to say a joke, I do not want to try to explain plausibly, because it is not understood by those who want to be right and by lunatics and know-it-alls addicted to stupidity. And moreover, new lies are constructed from them and spread worldwide, which are then accepted and believed by equally stupid people. This is unfortunately the usual thing with the majority of Earthlings, which is why it is probably better not to talk about it anymore and simply leave everything unexplained with the wrong and yet correct, so also with the lies and deceit, as these always arise and as everything actually happened back then.
We are here in a world where the majority of humanity considers religious faith to be fully valid, and thus the effective truth is pushed aside and frowned upon by lies and deceit. Similarly, an opinion is always considered to be correct, even though it is only an assumption. The fact that misunderstandings, lies, and deceptions, etc. arise from this is something that Earth humans do not even think about to the extent of an iota. This is to say nothing of the fact, as I have very often found in my previous learning concerning the behavior of Earth humans, that their bulk generally do not take the trouble of thought to question an opinion as to its truthfulness.
It is of no use anyway if something is said that corresponds to the full truth, and in this respect, because then it is not only vehemently opposed and reacted to with stupid and ill-considered demonstrations that possibly cause damage, but everything, wrong or correct, is sometimes even championed with rage, fanaticism, beatings and destruction, and even with murder and manslaughter. This is also proven by the radical, sick, and crazy environmentalist apostles, as also demonstrated by the demonstrators around Greta Thunberg, and the fanatical and criminal last generation financed by a billionaire, who do more harm than good and cause more harm than good. All the idiots and uneducated, stupid and hypocritical supporters and followers of both sexes who vehemently and unthinkingly participate in the machinations of these criminal environmentalist demonstrators, or simply support their demonstrations, do not understand the truth. Namely, that overpopulation is to blame for everything and is the greatest evil of all. In their stupidity, they do not understand that only the measure of a very rapid reduction of Earth's humanity can bring benefit and salvation, namely through a blatant reduction of humanity far below 1 billion world population. This alone is how it can be made possible for the Earth and all its diverse life to continue to exist, only through a worldwide and officially controlled birth stop lasting several years. This alone prevents nature from completely and forever wiping out more than 1,500 genera and species of life forms year after year, such as plants, animals, creatures, and other living beings of all genera and species. This happens solely through the machinations of all kinds, through industry, the companies and corporations, through agriculture destroying everything with poisons, large-scale market gardens, the poison-spreading private garden operators and other poison spreaders, the authorities with all kinds of weed poisons and other poisons for the benefit of humanity and companies, corporations, agriculture and private individuals, etc., are poisoning the atmosphere and the whole world, burning down forests and drought areas, and thus polluting the atmosphere and the air that human beings, animals, birds, and all life forms breathe. And the Earth is being exploited and robbed of the last reserves of its resources, which will not only soon run out, but also weaken the planet through exploitation, and have already damaged it to such an extent that it can no longer maintain its normal course. The atmosphere is also already so poisoned, and moreover its natural function has been impaired that the climate has changed, which will bring devastating natural disasters in the future that the Earthling can no longer bring under control. He has already destroyed and partly destroyed the whole of nature and the whole of the ecosystems in such a way that they are very difficult to regenerate again, or are destroyed for all time. The Earthling has really robbed and destroyed the whole world on its surface, and down to the great depths of its interior for the sake of filthy money and greed for its wealth, as well as through his machinations for living and for his needs and desires, as well as its luxuries, etc. Consequently, not much useful is left of the Earth's treasures. Even many species and kinds of animals, creatures, and other life forms have been shot down and exterminated without hesitation and without pardon by unscrupulous hunters and other persons who claimed and still claim that they would thereby regulate the game population. But that is just idiotic Earthling thinking, because the living world of nature and thus of the wilderness, where is this at all today, when everything is swamped by human beings, and they take upon themselves the cheek to be above nature and all its life, has been regulating itself since the existence of the Earth. But the human beings have made a complete mess of the Earth all around in all its existing, and is now on the way to destroy the rest that is still left, and thereby completely destroy the planet Earth, and wipe out everything.
And I have seen what will come to pass. For now the time has come when what has been seen will be fulfilled, and the Earth will finally, unconscionably, and thoughtlessly be driven on the path of destruction. This is because the time has come when the waters will be plundered, deep down to the bottom of the lakes, other waters, rivers, streams, and seas. But the life forms of all waters will resist. Besides overproducing in huge masses, the time has come when the wildlife will turn against humanity. Land animals and creatures, etc., will increasingly defend themselves against the intrusion of human beings into the wilderness space and kill the invading human beings. This, as the living beings of the waters will do more and more, especially in the seas, where human beings will be attacked, killed, and even ships destroyed and sunk by aquatic animals, aquatic creatures, and many other aquatic beings. There will also be marine creatures that reproduce independently in excess without sex partners. Marine creatures will multiply by the millions in large numbers and attack human technical achievements in the waters and render them useless. This, as many as yet unknown and partly incurable diseases will afflict Earth humans, namely by hitherto unknown bacteria and viruses from the depths of the waters of the seas and from the seabeds, that is to say the ocean floors, which will be churned up, broken open, and whose resources will be exploited by the earthling. In the process, the seabeds are destroyed, whereby a lot of ground ice is loosened and floats to the surface, contaminated with methane gas, which can even ignite and burn itself in the heat of the sun, causing havoc on the surface of the earth, perhaps setting fire to forests, in addition to the gas entering the atmosphere and already causing a lot of damage and exerting a negative influence on the climate. This is all very unpleasant, but I must also tell you something unpleasant, namely that Ptah cannot return this month because he has to remain elsewhere, where he has to take over and lead some tasks with peoples of our Federation. Florina and Bermunda will also be at his side. And Jurata and Jaffa have to be back on Era, and so other persons will continue their tasks on Earth, while another person will come helpfully to my side. But you will also receive an unexpected visit, namely from the younger twin brother of Svath, whom you met in 1951 when—
Fabulous. That he's still alive. He was only about 4 or 6 minutes younger than Svath. His name was Wait a Minute. I don't remember exactly, but his name was probably Salon or something. He was only here for a short time, sort of visiting Svath. He was a very educated personality, as much educated as Svath, and he had the same high knowledge, because the two of them used to learn the same thing together, as I was told at the time. I remember that.
Man, that is a surprise, because I haven't thought of that for a long time, and I put it all out of my memory.
Not Salan, but Safar is his name, and he even knows your mother tongue, which he learned explicitly to be able to converse with you in that way. He is really very old, but he is still in generally good shape. He wants to see you again just privately and maybe for 1 or 2 hours.
That is a thing I never would have thought, let alone ever expected such a surprise.
Things and incidents sometimes come up that are surprises.
Yes, I guess you could say that, and this surprise of the coming of the twin brother of Svath is big. I am looking forward to this aged gentleman, and to see him again and to be able to talk to him, that makes me particularly happy. But what I am not happy about is what is happening in Ukraine. There is only talk of the Ukrainian army and the population, which has many dead to mourn. But there are also many Russian families who have to mourn an enormous number of dead military personnel who are dying in the senseless war, as well as civilians, just as it is also happening senselessly in Ukraine. This is not good for either of the warring parties, but America in particular is profiting outrageously as a result. But no one cares at all if all that can be done is murder and destruction, and the ringleaders and their stupid admirers can bask in their glory. For all of them, human lives count for nothing, just as they do not for all those who advocate war or otherwise sway the scepter for one side or the other, or those who supply weapons and thereby support the murdering, killing and destruction in a partisan way and are happy when, from the point of view of the religious, Satan can rule. If the peoples could think about this, if they did not cling to a religious belief and really thought for themselves instead of harboring illusory thoughts, then what is called real peace would look quite different. This would be because it would be recognized that since time immemorial it is only the rulers who stir up the people in a partisan way and make them hostile to another people and then start a war. It is always the rulers who abuse their might and create enmity against other states and indoctrinate large sections of the population, in bondage to them with hatred and enmity against other peoples, in order to then wage war on the other peoples who have been hatefully hated for a short or long time. However, it is always the rulers who unleash wars that are never justified, as they never were back in ancient times and only brought hatred, death, murder, manslaughter, injustice, destruction, suffering, need and misery, genocide, and ultimately even disease and rampantly spreading disease. It is never the people of a country who start a war, but since time immemorial it has always been the main rulers, female and male, kings, emperors, dictators, despots, sect chiefs and presidents, etc., as well as other elements of governments and sects who indoctrinate the other elements of governments or believers of religious sects. As a result of indoctrination, these people who are hostile and hateful towards other peoples or people of other faiths, that is to say religious sects, quickly agree with the ideas and violent ringleaders. Consequently, these human beings open the way to violence for themselves, and once they have opened it, it inevitably leads to war. This, of course, is advocated by all those who, without hesitation, are of the same mind as the ringleaders. It is true that these are only parts of the peoples, but as a rule, it is the majority who howl along with the ringleaders and then also act according to their sense, namely out of their indoctrinated enmity and with hatred. Consequently, murder, manslaughter, and destruction, etc., are committed without hesitation, while only a minority is of a different and therefore peaceful and reasonable sense and does not allow itself to be indoctrinated with enmity and hatred. Truly, it is urgently necessary that the human beings of the earth themselves begin to cultivate sensible thoughts, and finally understand that no dear God already regulates everything and brings the hoped-for peace to the human being, as well as finally ends all war and that it will never come again. It is for the human beings of earth to finally grasp and understand that it is they alone who think up and direct everything and anything, and that they themselves are what they call God and worship senselessly, because there really is no God and this imaginary figure is only a humanly fanciful invention. Instead of religiously believing, it would be urgently necessary for the earthling to learn to cultivate independent thoughts himself, instead of believing, neither religiously nor worldly. And so the human being, in every country, that is to say state, should be anxious to appoint rulers only on sight, that is to say for a certain time by popular election, in order to recall them immediately and without pardon, as soon as any tendencies of indoctrination towards the co-rulers or the people arise, as well as hostility or hatred, etc. But it is still to be said that it is very regrettable if it is not understood that the human being should remain neutral in all things of life, in his behavior, and in his dealings with other human beings, and with everything in general. For my part, together with Svath, I have traveled all over the world and still visited countries myself, such as the whole of Europe, West and East Pakistan, now Bangladesh and Burma, Nepal, India, and the whole of the Middle and Far East in general. I have even lived with savages, as I have also been alone in many countries of Africa, Arabia, and also in Persia, today Iran. I have lived literally with Bedouins and even with cannibals and headhunters, etc. Consequently, also frequently with human beings of other faiths, such as Islam and its sects, Buddhists, nature god worshippers, Hindus, atheists, with various Christian directions and sects, tribal religions, Mormons, etc., etc. But I have always and without exception come through the world in good shape, and without any problems, troubles, or any complaints and unpleasantness, if I disregard the fact that from my early adolescence I was tormented by a sect and persecuted all over the world, and often even had my life threatened. All this only because a sectarian and a teacher were frustrated because I kept away from religious faith even as a young boy. The persecution continues to this day, with evidence of the effects even in the presence of witnesses. Now, in all my travels, where and with whichever human beings with the most diverse customs, traditions, and religions or other beliefs, peculiarities, views, behavior, and other things I have always been for short or long periods, sometimes several months, I have never caused offense. I have always behaved neutrally towards everything and everyone, whereby I could, of course, openly bring up everything I had learned, what moved me and occupied me. And never did problems or anything negative arise as a result of my religious non-belief in a God, as well as in the knowledge of the creation and the explanations of its existence. Often I was even invited to personally participate in the respective religious acts or other acts of faith, so that I could personally experience how a certain religious act, etc., had to proceed. As for example, when I was given the honorary name Muhammad Abdullah and the status of a Muslim in Karachi, Pakistan. While my profession was everywhere in the world and in every country and at all times of my life, to always maintain absolute neutrality in all customs and all ways of thinking of a human being in every situation. Thus I met every human being with a belief of every kind, whether religious, secular, atheistic, or nature-loving, fully and completely with respect, and this also in such a way that I observed absolutely every form of religious or secular customs and traditions neutrally, and did not allow myself to form an opinion about correct or wrong or to represent this. Having an opinion is always wrong in any case, because such an opinion is always based only on assumptions, but never on absolute certainty, which is based solely on effective truth. And thus, by living neutrality alone, it is avoided that, for example, customs and traditions of other countries or human beings are not respected, are attacked, or are simply spoiled. A human being, however, who cannot be neutral, and consequently cannot accept, for example, one human being's customs or religious or secular beliefs, should refrain from speaking out loudly. Human beings whose behavior is different from common practice, etc., are to be accepted as they are. However, the human being who does not like this should think about himself and try to regulate himself in order to become a true human being and to treat his neighbor correctly and let him be as he is and live according to his customs and traditions, which are nobody's business but his own, and according to which he lives righteously.
This belongs in the unreasonable ears and eyes, but it will not be especially these who will think about it when you retrieve our conversation. Write it down, and it is published by you as a contact report.
I suppose that will be the case.
Certainly, for logic, reason, and sanity cannot be found in the bulk of Earth humans. But now, dear friend, I'm afraid I must go, and I must go to Era for about a fortnight, but after that, I shall be here again.
Very well, then.
Until then. Goodbye, dear friend, and see to it.
I will. Goodbye. Keep well and see you again.